"They tell me she is plain," said the Duke of Edenmere to his valet an hour before his wedding, "and that I am fortunate, at least, that a plain wife makes no trouble. I confess I take no comfort in it. I would rather she made trouble and had a face I could bear to look at across a table for 40 years. He said it lightly, because he could not afford to say it bitterly, but the bitterness was there beneath, and his valet, who had dressed him since he was a boy, pretended not to hear it. Nathaniel, Duke of Edenmere, was to be married that morning to a woman he had never seen. It was a matter of land and debt and a dead man's will, as such things always were. His late father had gambled Edenmere to the edge of ruin and had contracted, before he died, to mend it the only way left to him, by binding his son to the daughter of a rich northern family whose fortune would clear the estate's debts and whose ancient blood would satisfy the lawyers. The girl was called Miss Isolde Marchmont. Nathaniel knew 3 things about her and no more: that her family were as rich as rumour said, that she had lived retired and unseen in the country all her life, and that everyone who had ever met her described her, with a faintly pitying tact, as plain, but so very good. Plain, but so very good. He had heard the phrase a dozen times, and he had come to understand exactly what it meant. It meant a woman no one had troubled to look at twice. It meant that when they could find nothing to praise in her face, they praised her character instead, the way one praises the weather when the company is dull. It meant that he, Nathaniel, who had once been reckoned the handsomest and most sought-after man in 3 counties, was to spend the rest of his life yoked to a woman he could not have chosen, for the sake of a fortune he had not earned, to pay for the sins of a father he had not forgiven. He was not a cruel man. That was, in its way, the worst of it. A cruel man might have gone to the altar careless. Nathaniel went full of dread and shame, dread of the joyless years ahead, and shame at his own dread, because he knew perfectly well that a good and plain woman deserved a husband who wanted her, and he could not make himself want a stranger sight unseen, and he despised himself for it. "She has consented to this, the same as I," he said half to himself as the valet settled his coat. "Sold to a stranger to pay her family's ambitions, the poor creature. I ought at least to be kind to her, I mean to be. Whatever her face, she is not to blame for it, and she deserves a husband who will never let her guess how little he wished to marry her." "That is well said, Your Grace," the valet murmured. "It is easily said," Nathaniel replied, "an hour before. We shall see how well I keep to it across 40 years. The Edenmere chapel was small and very old and full of grey morning light, and it was full, too, of every gossipings in the county, come to see the ruined Duke marry the rich plain bride, and to whisper about it behind their prayer books. Nathaniel took his place at the altar and fixed his eyes on the middle distance and composed his features into the pleasant, unreadable mask he had worn since he was a boy, and he prepared himself to feel nothing, or to feel it privately. The music changed. The great door opened. And Nathaniel, Duke of Edenmere, did not turn to look, because he did not trust his own face, and because he was afraid of what he would feel when he saw her. He heard the murmur run through the congregation. He heard the soft tread of her slippers on the stone. He felt her come to stand beside him, a slight figure in white, veiled thickly in old lace so that he could see nothing of her at all, only a pale shape, a lowered head, hands folded and still. She did not tremble. He noticed that distantly. Whatever else she was composed. This plain rich stranger. She stood beside him at the altar as steady as a soldier, and something in that steadiness reached him despite himself, because he recognized in it the same thing he was doing, the same holding still, the same refusal to let the watching world see what the moment cost. The clergyman began. They made their vows in low, clear voices, the 2 of them, to the God of the little grey chapel, and to the whispering county, and to each other, a stranger to a stranger. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and even unexpectedly warm, and Nathaniel found himself listening to it, and thinking, against all his dread, that it was a voice he could bear to hear across a table for 40 years, whatever the face behind the veil. And then the clergyman spoke the words that end the ceremony, and gave the Duke leave to lift his bride's veil, and Nathaniel, Duke of Edenmere, turned at last to face the woman he had married sight unseen, and with hands that were not quite steady, put back the old lace from her face. The lace fell back, and the Duke of Edenmere forgot, entirely and all at once, how to breathe. The woman beneath the veil was not plain. She was not plain in any degree, by any measure, in any light that had ever been made. She had a face of such quiet, unstudied loveliness that Nathaniel simply stood and stared at it like a man who has walked out of a dark room into full noon. Grey eyes, clear and steady and faintly amused, that met his without a flicker of coyness. A soft grave mouth that curved, now ever so slightly, at his astonishment. A stillness about her that was not coldness but its opposite, a deep-banked warmth held quietly in reserve, waiting. She was beautiful in the way that lasts, the way that has nothing to do with a season's fashion and everything to do with the person looking out from behind the eyes. And Nathaniel, who had braced himself for 40 years of kind endurance, felt the whole ground of his life shift beneath his feet. "You are," he began and could not finish. "Not what you were told," she said softly, so that only he could hear, and there was laughter in her low voice and something else beneath it, a wariness quickly hidden. "I know. I am sorry to have surprised you. I did rather arrange to." The clergyman was waiting. The county was craning. Nathaniel recollected himself with an effort that cost him everything and bent, and pressed his lips to her brow as the ceremony required, and it was done. They were married. And he led his new duchess back down the aisle through a chapel full of faces that had come to pity him, and now stared instead in frank astonishment. And he did not hear a word that was said to them, because his whole mind was a single ringing question. It was not until they were alone at last, in the carriage that bore them back to Edenmere, that he could ask it. "You knew," he said. "You knew they called you plain. You let it be said. Why?" Isolde was quiet for a moment, watching the grey country roll past the window. Then she turned to him, and her steady eyes were serious now. "Because I am rich," she said simply, "and because I have been rich all my life, and a rich woman with a tolerable face learns young that she can never once be certain why she is wanted. Every man who ever came to my father's house came for the fortune and saw it was for me. Every one of them looked at me and saw a bank. I grew so weary of it, your grace, that when this match was proposed, a marriage of pure necessity, a debt to be paid, a bargain in which no one need pretend to love me, I found it almost a relief, and I made a bargain of my own with myself. I let it be given out that I was plain. I stayed retired and let the pitying word go round, and I came to my own wedding behind a heavy veil. She lifted her chin. Because I wanted, just once in my life, to be married by a man who expected nothing from my face, who came to the altar for the land and the debt and nothing else, so that whatever grew between us afterward, if anything ever did, I could be sure it had not begun with my looks. I wanted to be a plain bride. It was the only way I could think of to find out whether a man might come to want the woman and not the fortune or the face. Her voice dropped. I did not expect you to look at me the way you looked at me just now. I confess it has rather undone my careful plan. Nathaniel looked at his wife, his clever, guarded, quietly radiant wife, who had disguised her own loveliness to protect a heart that had been valued for everything except itself, and he understood her completely. Because he had spent his whole life being wanted for his title and his face, and never once for the man beneath, and had learned the same weary distrust from the opposite shore. "Isolde," he said, "may I tell you something, now that we are married and it can do no harm?" He took a breath. "I dreaded this day. I have dreaded it for a month. Not because I thought you plain, or rather, yes, precisely because I thought you plain, and I am ashamed of it, and I will confess the whole of it to you, because I think you above all people will understand. I was told you were plain but good, and I made up my mind to be kind to you and to spend my life hiding from you how little I had wished to marry a stranger. I dressed this morning half sick with dread. I stood at that altar and would not look at you because I was afraid of my own face." He laughed, low and wondering. "And then I lifted your veil, and the whole miserable calculation I had made, the land, the debt, the 40 years of endurance, it all fell to pieces, because I was looking at the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and she was mine, and I had done nothing to deserve her. And that," said Isolde quietly, "is exactly what I did not want, do you not see? You dread me for a month, thinking me plain, and then the veil lifts and suddenly you are all admiration, and how am I ever to know, husband, whether it is me you have come to want, or only the face that surprised you? You have proved my whole fear in the space of a single morning." It was a fair thrust, and it landed, and Nathaniel was silent under it. He had made her point for her. He had dreaded the plain woman and been undone by the pretty one, and that was precisely the shallow, mercenary weighing she had built her whole disguise to escape. But he was not a shallow man, whatever his dread that morning, and he had spent his life on the far side of the very loneliness she was describing, and so he did not defend himself. He did the harder thing. He took her gloved hand in both of his, there in the swaying carriage, and he said, "You are right, and so I will not ask you to believe a word I have said today. Words are cheap, and I have given you nothing yet but a month's dread and a morning's astonishment, and neither is worth having." His grey eyes held hers. "Let me earn it instead. You wished to be married by a man who wanted nothing of your face. Very well. I did not know your face this morning, and I still married you for the land and the debt, exactly as you planned. So the beginning, at least, is clean. Everything after this hour I will make you certain of. I will spend the coming years showing you the man beneath the title, and you will show me the woman beneath the fortune, and we will find out together, slowly, whether two people who were each so weary of being wanted for the wrong reasons might come to want each other for the right ones. I will not rush you. I will not flatter you. I will only be here every day, being true, until the day you look at me and know, past all your careful doubting, that it is you I love, and not your face and not your fortune, but you." He pressed his lips to her gloved knuckles. "Will you let me try?" An isolde Duchess of Edenmere, who had spent her whole life certain she could never be wanted for herself, looked at the grave, honest, unexpected man she had married in disguise, and felt the careful wariness she had carried all her life begin at last to loosen. "Yes," she said, "I will let you try." A slow smile touched her grave mouth. "And I will tell you a secret in return, husband, to make us even. I heard this morning, before the ceremony, a foolish young duke telling his valet that he would rather his bride made trouble, and had a face he could bear than that she were plain and made none. The chapel walls are very thin." Her eyes danced. "So I know that you dreaded me. And I find I like you the better for having confessed it, rather than pretending, as every other man in my life has pretended, that he had wanted me all along." Nathaniel began helplessly to laugh, and after a moment she laughed with him, and the two of them rode home to Edenmere laughing in the grey morning like the strangers turned conspirators they were. He did try. He tried for the rest of his life. And it was the easiest labour he had ever undertaken, because the woman he had married in dread turned out to be everything he had never dared hope for in a wife, clever and kind and quietly funny, and possessed of a steadiness that made the ruined old house feel, for the first time in his memory, like a place a man might be happy in. The fortune cleared the debts, and Edenmere flourished, and no one ever again called the Duchess plain. But Nathaniel, who had lifted her veil and been undone, learned in time to love a thing far deeper than the face that had astonished him that morning. He learned to love the guarded, generous heart she had hidden behind it, and the mind that had been clever enough to disguise its own beauty rather than be valued for it, and the trust she gave him. At last, slowly and completely, when she came to be certain past all doubt that he wanted the woman and nothing else. Years later, when they were grey together, Isolde asked him once, teasing, whether he had ever regretted lifting the veil to find a beauty when he had steeled himself for a plain wife. "Regretted it," said the Duke of Edenmere. "My dear, I have thanked God for it every morning of my life. Though not," he added, taking her hand as he had taken it in that swaying carriage half a lifetime before, "for the reason you feared all those years ago. The face astonished me, I confess it, but it was the woman behind it who kept me. It always was. I only had the great good fortune to marry her twice over, once for her fortune, sight unseen as a bargain, and once for herself, every single day since. And Isolde, who had spent her girlhood certain she could never be loved for herself alone, laid her grey head against her husband's shoulder, and was